Welcome to the Avro Heritage Museum podcast.
The second half of my conversation with Frank Pleszak. Frank picks up the story by telling us how he began introducing artefacts and people relevant to Avro history to the museum before becoming very much committed as a volunteer himself. We hear about his work supporting key events and commemorations at the museum, as well as about his work on acquisitions and his role in keeping the museum in contact and working in partnership with other aviation museums. Although his extensive work doesn't involve regular engagement with visitors, he talks movingly of some work he did with pupils from a special school. But he begins by telling us about those earliest contacts with the museum and with museum staff.
I'd made contact with him, and then a bit later I discovered that one of my neighbour's fathers was actually an Avro draftsman and had worked direct for Roy Chadwick, and he'd got some diagrams that he should not have had from Avro, and also his drafting logbook, which he shouldn't have had, and he didn't know what to do with them. I said, well, I know what you can do with them. So again, we contacted the Avro Heritage Museum to see whether they'd like them, and we brought them over, and he donated them to the museum. And at the time, Harry Holmes was here, so it was great. Harry Holmes was one of the names that I'd known from the very past, one of the most significant names for me in the story of Avro. So it was great meeting Harry then for the first time. I suppose by then I'd actually started doing blogging and writing, and I used to write or blog about obscure aspects of aviation that were of interest to me, and particularly, as I mentioned, aviation around the Northwest. So I used to write some obscure things about Avro, Lancaster, and particularly the dam busters, and that was brilliant. And then I mean, this was a bizarre coincidence because I live in a quiet little village. I'd mentioned that one of my neighbours his father had worked for Roy Chadwick, and then another one was that one of my neighbours and who I'd known 30 years since I'd lived there, but we'd we'd never spoke, to be honest, because we both had dogs that had never got on. We only used to say hello as we waved across the road as our dogs were snarling at each other. On one occasion, I was out and I'd met her without the dogs, and we were talking, and we mentioned the subject of Lancasters, and she sort of casually mentioned that her uncle had been a dam buster and that he'd been killed on the raid. Of course, I didn't believe her. I thought, yeah, we've all got these stories. But the more she talked, the more I realised that not only did she know what she was talking about, the depth to which she knew it was incredible. And then she turned up with a pile of documents, including letters from Guy Gibson, and that was just amazing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was letters from Guy Gibson, from the RAF, from the film company that were going to make the film in 1954. It was utterly amazing. In fact, when I had it at my house, I couldn't sleep. I thought, oh, God, if the roof leaks and it get wet, or if we get burgled. Anyway, I scanned them and got them back to her. But there was also a fragment from the aeroplane that her uncle had actually been killed in. It was the last aeroplane to have a permanent memorial that was lost over mainland Europe. All the others had a permanent memorial. This one didn't. And she was invited in 2019 to an opening or an unveiling of the memorial, at which she was given this fragment of the aeroplane. So that inspired me to actually write a book on her uncle, and I've called it The High Peak Dam Buster because he was born in Chinley in the High Peak. I gave a presentation about it in Mellor, where I live, and a couple of the Avro Heritage Museum trustees came to it. After that, I was invited to take part in the 80th anniversary commemoration of the Dam Busters, so I worked on that.
What is it you think about that aircraft and that whole operation that remains a fascination for many people, but also for you? What is it for you?
Well, it's so iconic. I mean, it's Manchester-based aviation. The Lancaster was such an iconic, famous, successful aeroplane. And the dam busters were such a unique and interesting mission. Everybody knows it. I mean, they only know what they've seen from the film. I mean, I've been now doing talks for almost 5 years on the dam busters, and I just know that people do not know about the dam busters. And it But what they do know is has sparked their imagination and interest. It is an incredible story. Everything about it from start to finish, it's an incredible story, and it will continue to live on. I mean, we've got several replicas of what we call the bouncing bomb. You know, for pedants like me, it didn't bounce and it wasn't a bomb. It was a skimming depth charger, but it's a fantastic story, and it's not just here. It's not only nationally, it's globally. You know, it is an incredible story, and its legacy will live on. And of course, they trained quite nearby here as well. The aeroplanes were built here. They were modified here.
I was talking to somebody in the museum on Saturday. He said he's not sure he remembers it, but people tell him he was there when those training events were
fantastic, yeah.
Because he lives in Sheffield. So
yeah. It's nearer to Sheffield, yeah. And there is a memorial up there to the dam busters and everything. So it's fantastic. It is a fantastic story, yeah. So that was that. So then I helped with the exhibition to commemorate the 80th anniversary. And we had Norma, actually, my neighbour. Norma came as the guest of honour. She opened the exhibition, cutting the yellow ribbons that signified the 60 feet that the dam busters flew out towards the dam. And it was brilliant because we had members of her family here. The pilot was a famous guy called Henry Maudsley. He came from a very famous family. They owned the Standard Motor Company. So we had members of the Maudsley family here as well, which was great to see them and really nice to meet them. So quite a significant event, and the BBC did a big coverage as well. So that was good. And I suppose then after that, immediately afterwards, I was asked to help on the 100th anniversary of Woodford of Avro moving to Woodford. So that took a lot of organisation, and we also did at that point an exhibition on the history of Manchester aviation, which was great for me. So I arranged I've got involved in lots of the companies around here that were involved and had been involved in aviation. Arranged site visits for lots of the Avro Heritage Museum members. I got various families that were involved throughout the history of Avro involved. I got the Groves family. They came up, they were involved. Crossleys, who owned Avro for a short period of time. Well, not for 8 years, actually. They came, their descendants came. KNDS, which is a big multinational military construction company in Stockport that are what used to be Fairey Aviation, and Fairey Aviation took over the Crossley site in Stockport, so there's a history, a legacy there. So lots and lots. I got people from what was the de Havilland Propeller Factory in Bolton to come. They now, de Havilland Propellers became BAE Aerodynamics, or BAE Missiles, and they're now called MBDA, a big missile manufacturer. So they've been involved. And I continue to do talks to various societies. I do them to the Royal Aeronautical Society, to various museums, history societies, Probus groups, U3A, and even WI group. So I still do these talks, and I've even done them at Manchester University. And I was a student at Manchester University. The bizarre thing is, it's in the very same lecture theatres where, had I have attended more as a student, I might have got a better degree than I actually did. So there, a lesson to somebody, I'm sure. So I've established various relationships with the museum to various organisations, including with the bit I mentioned. I worked on this STEM, this science.
Tell us a bit more about STEM.
So basically, STEM, it's just an acronym for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and it's just a way of involving study in the various aspects that is associated with. I've established a relationship with Manchester University because they've donated us a drone, so we want to do some work with a drone. They've offered us a simulator and various other projects that we would like to work together with Manchester University. So that's ongoing. And also I've maintained a contact with Cranfield University, and I've been down there to see them. And sadly, it's not like an old World War II airbase like I mentioned when I was there. It's now Cranfield University. It's a proper campus type university. All the hangars have been redeveloped and everything. So it was quite shocking for me to see it, because I was expecting it to be like just when I was there 40 odd years ago. So we're working with Cranfield University and also a company there that have got the very last aeroplane that was delivered from Woodford and is still operating, which is a HS-146, a BAE 146 that's used by FAAM, which is the facility for atmospheric airborne monitoring. I think I've got that acronym the wrong way around, but they still use it for doing this atmospheric research. So
that's the last aircraft.
It was, and it's just been had a midlife upgrade. And it's going to be used for I think another 20 years. But all the
was that the last British passenger aircraft made as well?
I think it was, yeah. But the actual environmental equipment was installed by Manchester University. So there's another connection. So with their environmental services department, I've established contact with a guy who did it, who bizarrely lives just a couple of miles from where I live in Marple.
And we had STEM activities with school, college students as well. Is that right?
Well, yeah, STEM is right the way through from the very youngest, to the very oldest students. And we've got lots of STEM ideas that we'd like to look at putting in place for the museum. Lots and lots, but it's time and effort and money that it needs to look at. So it needs costing
and you mentioned earlier, Frank, the AHUK, which is Aviation Heritage.
That's establishing contact with like-minded museums, organisations and individuals throughout the country that are involved in the preservation of historic aeroplanes. And they have a quarterly meeting at various places around to discuss what's happening in the field of aviation heritage. And obviously the Avro Heritage Museum is so significant in that. So it's great to attend on behalf of the Avro Heritage Museum and see what other people are doing. And it's also establishing contact with these other people and gaining from their experiences as well, from what they're doing. And again, we've been to some great locations whilst I've been doing that. It's been fantastic. So, and we're hoping to host one of their meetings here very soon as well.
And how about, Frank, acquisitions? Because you work on that, don't you, as well?
Yeah. There's a team, the acquisitions team, and we look at aspects of particularly the Avro aviation scene that we would like to get for the museum, and particularly if we're offered, anything that's relevant. I mean, and the RF museums at the moment are actually moving lots of their stuff onto other museums, and we've acquired quite a few things recently. We've got an Avro Unsung, we've got various weapons and bits and pieces. Lots of models have come. So anything that's offered to the museum or that the museum wants is discussed at an acquisitions team meeting. If it's something we think we should proceed with, then a recommendation is made to the trustees, and they decide whether or not.
So it's certainly not automatic. It's not.
Not automatic. And similarly, when people bring things in to donate to the museum, we need to look to see whether it is suitable for the museum and on what basis they want to donate it. Typically we want gifts. We don't want things on loan, but it depends what it is that they're offering. And some of the things that are turning up are incredible. Some of the old logbooks and things, it's fantastic to see. And also we look at disposals as well, see what we've got that we don't really need or whether it's duplicated, to see whether it's something that we can move on. So that's what the acquisitions and disposal.
Our space is limited, isn't it? Even though we hope it's going to expand.
The space is very, very limited, so we've got to be very careful. And as you've seen, we've had recently quite a few big items delivered. We've had a complete Avro Unsung, and we've had a complete Row 1 biplane, which is, when it's assembled, is going to be huge. We've got a full-size Shackleton waiting to be reassembled and everything. So there's lots and lots to do. It's awaiting, I suppose, on what happens with the proposal for an extension to the museum. But at the moment, it's all in storage, which is great for the likes of me to see. But and we do behind-the-scenes tours. It's not generally accessible to the public, but we do allow them to come and see it on special events or on specially arranged visits. We do a behind-the-scenes tour, or we will be doing. But other than that, I suppose for me, I just feel incredibly privileged and honoured to be working with some of the people that I do. Some of the names that I've revered and looked up to all through my aviation life. The likes of Harry Holmes, Eric Harley, George Jenks, Steve Abbott, to name a few. But also some of the incredible volunteers that work here and their experiences. They've worked on some of the most iconic aeroplanes. Some of them have flown them and some of them have worked on them. And it's just an absolute privilege and a pleasure to work with those people. So it's been especially nice for me to be now a part of it. And some of them are really good friends. And interestingly, I suppose, what it's also done is means that I've re-established friendship with Lloyd Robinson, who I'd first met in 1970, who now has continued his dad's work in the aviation field. And it's just an absolute pleasure to know him, and he's a good friend now again. So after all those years, we've re-established that fantastic contact, and it's just a real pleasure to be here.
What about the public? Is that a good part as well, seeing the impact the museum can make on the visitors?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't do much public facing. I have occasionally done tours of the Lancaster and the Vulcan cockpit, which I find amazing. It's great, and some of the questions are fantastic. Obviously, I don't do it too technical because for most people they're not. So it's just great to be able to do it, and I do really enjoy doing that. But for me, one of the best things was when I hosted a group of children from a school of special needs. And they thought they might be difficult, but it was so rewarding to take them around and show them things and really inspire their enthusiasm. And it really moved me, really. I found, we expected it to be difficult, and it wasn't difficult. It was really rewarding and pleasurable. And I think the more we can do that, I think the better the museum will be.
And maybe the other bit you mentioned in connection with dam busters, that people come with some preconceived ideas because they've seen a film, the video, but that's not the true story. And it's great, isn't it, that they then get the true story.
It is, yeah. I mean, next week, for example, we've got a Forces weekend, and I know there's going to be quite a lot of interest in the dam busters. In fact, I believe that somebody's doing a reconstruction of the dam buster briefing, which is not something I've seen, but I'm told it's very good. So I'm going to take a break and make sure I actually go and see that. Maybe I'll learn something. Yeah.
Frank, I always ask this at the end. Is there anything that you would have liked to have talked about that hasn't come up?
I think I've covered everything, but I think for me it's to stress the how privileged I feel not only to work with some of these people, but I mentioned that school for special needs. That was a real privilege as well to be able to do that, and I felt that was something that surprised me really. I thought it was going to be difficult. I didn't realise how enjoyable and rewarding it was to be able to do that, and I think the more that we can do that, and I know that we do quite a lot of it. I'm not generally involved in that, but that little bit I was fantastic. Yeah.
Frank, we usually do ask people when we do the podcast just to tell us very briefly what the journey was that brought them into contact with the museum. Just to hear that full story has been fascinating. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you again to Frank for sharing that time with us. As I mentioned in the introduction to the first programme, those of us who do public-facing work at the museum always try to make a point of telling visitors just how much work has to go on behind the scenes for us to function in the way that we do. And Frank is a prime example of someone who brings so much to the museum and makes a huge contribution to the way that we're able to operate, develop and grow. But for now, that's all from me, Chris Pleszak. Cheerio.
Make sure you follow us in your podcast app to ensure that you don't miss out on future episodes.